So last week, after learning of the sad death of the great Jeff Beck, I spent a considerable amount of time with one of the staples of his repertoire, the song "'Cause We've Ended as Lovers," written for Jeff Beck by Stevie Wonder. Stevie wrote this piece in part as an apology to Beck. He'd written Superstition originally for Jeff Beck as well, but Motown Records, in their great generosity of spirit, decided to release Stevie's version before Jeff Beck could release his, probably robbing Jeff Beck of a #1 hit. But, history has been kind to both versions of Superstition, and were it not for that little mishap, we wouldn't have this beautiful ballad. Now, as I was working on the song last week, it really didn't feel like I was working on a pop song. It felt like I was working on classical music, like I was dealing with one of these scores back here that you see in my videos. And that's not because this piece sounds like classical music, but it's because it's composed like classical music, and in particular, it's composed like the music of J.S. Bach. And so I thought if I just took a minute or two of your time to sort of outline what Stevie's doing in this piece and how it would have parallels in the music of J.S. Bach, we might get some Bach fans checking out Stevie Wonder and vice versa. Part of what makes Bach Bach is his ability to create music that's incredibly expressive and incredibly interesting out of very, very simple ideas. Now, the simplest of all musical ideas has got to be the scale. And in fact, that's what Stevie Wonder is working with in this song. But of course, what makes something interesting is finding a different way to use a scale. So in this case, Bach has two things about his scale that are Stevie Wonder has two things about his scale that are particularly interesting. It's a C minor scale that starts on a D rather than a C, yeah? It continues down the C minor scale, but ends on an E natural, not an E flat. So it starts in C minor, but on a D, and ends in C major on an E. So it neither begins nor ends on a C, and it has what we call in classical Dorkland modal ambiguity, which means it can't decide if it's in minor or major. Bach would also take an idea like a scale and say, well, that's way too big a musical idea to just waste as a unit of his 7, 8 notes. That's tons of material. I like to work with 2 notes, and so does Stevie Wonder. So he breaks this scale into 2-note segments, yeah? So he has D to C, then B flat to A flat, G to F, and F to E natural. Now, that gesture is very Baroque, very J.S. Bach, because it's what we call also in classical nerdland an appoggiatura. Now, an appoggiatura is a note that wants to resolve stepwise because of the tension between the note itself and the chord underneath it. So in this case, the chord underneath it is C minor, and the note at the top of the chord is a D. So it wants to resolve down. Now, with my rocker jazzer hat on, I might say, but that's just a 9th chord, dude. That's just a 9th chord, yeah? C with a D on top. But to me, a 9th chord is a different thing. A 9th chord is a color. It's an extension. The 9th is an extension of the chord. So it's part of the color of the chord itself, rather than having a harmonic inclination to go somewhere else. So this is essentially triadic music, not jazzy music, but with this appoggiatura that wants to come down stepwise to resolve to the tonic. As if you're saying, well, if this is a piece in C minor, why doesn't it start on a C? It starts on the wrong note, and it wants to resolve down. So that tension that's already established by starting on the wrong note of the scale gives the whole piece its sense of intensity and intent. And then the next chord is A flat major, yeah? But again, he puts an appoggiatura on the top, in this case B flat, which wants to resolve down to A flat. And then the next chord is F minor, the 4 chord. Yeah. But he says, I'll start with the G again. And then finally a C major chord. Yeah. A sequence of appoggiaturas. And what could be more Baroque? What could be more J.S. Bach than a sequence? As people who know the song will know, that's not the whole song. While we're hearing that, in between each of these appoggiaturas, there's other material. Yeah, so there's an answer. And then again, there's an appoggiatura. And then there's an answer. And then there's an appoggiatura. And then there's an answer. And then finally, there's a cadence, yeah? Again, with an appoggiatura in it. There's a lot that's very Bach-y about this. We call this delineation of voices in Nerdland, yeah? So in, say, the Bach cello suites or the sonatas and partitas for solo violin, what Bach does all the time is use the 4 strings of the violin or the cello to create a sense of dialogue between different voices. And that's exactly what Stevie's doing here melodically, yeah? So you have a conversation between a soprano voice and a tenor voice. Yeah, and then again it continues soprano voice, tenor voice, soprano voice, tenor voice. So 2 different voices in conversation, but they're working with the same musical material. And again, this is very, very Bachian, this idea of absolute ultimate economy of musical means made as interesting as possible. So you have an appoggiatura, and then an appoggiatura. Yeah, and an appoggiatura, an appoggiatura, one more, and then absolutely gorgeous in its elegance of expression, this wonderful sense of conversation between the 2 melodic voices. And if you listen to Jeff Beck's recordings of this piece, he's so sensitive to that, the way he characterizes the 2 different voices to give them a different sound from each other. We'll talk more about that in a future video maybe. But it wouldn't be Bach if it was that simple. So of course the last little bit of icing on the cake that Stevie does so beautifully is to create variety through ornamentation, yeah? And this, again, this is so Bach. So you have a straight appoggiatura in the top voice, and then a turn in the tenor voice. A little mordant, we call it. Again, straight appoggiatura, a little mordant, one more appoggiatura, and then it becomes like a little turn. I can't help but think that when Stevie showed this to Jeff Beck, J.S. Bach must have been up there in the higher spheres, smiling down with approval. What a gorgeous piece of music.